blood seeped through my torn Prada dress as I took my final breath on the cold concrete of a federal penitentiary. My biological family put me there, sacrificing my life to protect their precious fake daughter. But death wasn't the end. It was the ultimate reset button. Oxygen burned my lungs, or at least the memory of it did. Before I tell you how I walked away from the people who shared my DN, you need to understand how they destroyed me the first time. I was 19 when the black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the rusted diner I worked at in South Boston. Arthur and Margaret Harrington stepped out looking like they had just walked off the pages of a Forbes spread. They told me there had been a mix-up at the hospital. I was their biological daughter. The girl they had raised for 19 years, Isabella, was a stranger's child. I thought I was being rescued. I thought I was finally going to have a family. Instead, I was stepping into a slaughterhouse. When they brought me back to their sprawling Connecticut estate, I quickly learned that biology meant nothing. Isabella was their pride and joy, a polished Ivy League-bound socialite who played the piano and hosted charity galas. I was the rough-around-the-edges waitress who didn't know which fork to use for a salad. Arthur, my supposed father, looked at me not with love, but with calculating disappointment. Margaret couldn't hide her grimaces when my accent slipped. And Tristan, my older brother, he despised me. He acted as a fiercely loyal guard dog for Isabella, constantly reminding me that I was an intruder, ruining their perfect family dynamic. Isabella, however, was the most dangerous of them all. Behind closed doors, she whispered that I was a parasite, a piece of trash that crawled out of the gutter to steal her life. But in front of our parents, she was an angel. She would intentionally buy me dresses 3 sizes too small, then cry to Margaret that she was only trying to help when I looked ridiculous at social events. She would hide my study notes, causing me to fail the private tutoring sessions Arthur paid for reinforcing their belief that I was inherently stupid. But the real betrayal came when I turned 21. The Harrington family business, a massive logistics empire, was quietly hemorrhaging money. They needed a massive injection of capital, and they found it in Alastair Montgomery. Alastair was the golden boy of Manhattan real estate and tech. He was a billionaire 30 years old, devastatingly handsome, and completely terrifying. Alastair needed a wife to clean up his playboy image before taking his company Montgomery Holdings public. Arthur saw an opportunity. But Isabella, sweet, perceptive, Isabella had done her homework. She had hired private investigators. She knew about the Montgomery curse. The curse wasn't magic. It was a suffocating web of insurmountable hidden debts, illegal offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and a history of domestic violence that the Montgomery family spent millions burying. Alastair's previous fiancée had mysteriously vanished. His father was quietly under investigation by the SEC. Marrying Alastair meant stepping onto a sinking ship filled with sharks. Isabella cried, begged, and threatened to swallow pills if they forced her to marry him. So my family turned to me. "It is your duty, Chloe," Arthur had told me, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We gave you a life of luxury. Now you will save this family." I was naive. I craved their validation so desperately that I agreed. The day I married Alastair, my family looked at me with relief, not because I looked beautiful, but because I was taking the bullet meant for their real daughter. My marriage was a living hell. Alastair was a sadistic narcissist. He monitored my calls, controlled my diet, and used me as a human punching bag when his business deals went south. But the physical abuse was only a fraction of the nightmare. Behind my back, Alastair and his lawyers forged my signature on dozens of shell company documents. When the FBI and the SEC finally raided Montgomery Holdings, Alastair played the victim. He pinned the entire money laundering scheme on me. I sat in a sterile interrogation room, begging for my family to hire me a decent lawyer. I used my one phone call to dial Arthur. "Please, Dad," I sobbed into the receiver. "I didn't do anything. You know I don't know anything about finance." "You are no longer a Harrington," Arthur replied coldly. "You brought disgrace to this family. Do not contact us again." At my trial, my own brother, Tristan, took the stand as a character witness for the prosecution. He told the jury I was a greedy, manipulative liar who had always resented wealth and would do anything to steal it. Isabella sat in the gallery, wearing a pristine white Chanel suit, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue for the press cameras. I was sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security federal prison. The harsh conditions combined with severe pneumonia I caught in my drafty cell broke my body within 2 years. My final memory was lying on the freezing concrete floor, watching a tiny television through the bars of the medical wing. The entertainment news was covering Isabella Harrington's lavish engagement to a European duke. My family had sacrificed my life to secure their wealth, allowing their fake daughter to live happily ever after. I died with the bitter taste of blood and regret in my mouth. Air rushed into my lungs with the force of a hurricane. I bolted upright, my hands desperately clawing at my throat. I expected to feel the rough, scratchy wool of my prison-issued blanket, but instead my fingers curled into silk sheets. I gasped, my vision swimming as the room slowly came into focus. Soft morning light filtered through heavy velvet curtains, Persian rugs, a massive mahogany vanity. I wasn't in a prison cell. I was in my bedroom at the Harrington estate. Trembling, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stumbled toward the vanity mirror. Staring back at me was a 20-year-old girl. My cheeks were full, my hair was glossy, and most importantly, the jagged scar on my collarbone, a parting gift from a prison guard's baton, was gone. I lunged for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up October 14th. My breath hitched. I knew this date. It was burned into my soul. Tonight was the Vanguard Charity Gala. Tonight was the night Alistair Montgomery was supposed to be introduced to Isabella, the night Isabella would fake a devastating panic attack to force me to take her place in the receiving line. Tonight was the night the trap was set. I had been reborn. A manic, breathless laugh escaped my lips. I fell to my knees, burying my face in my hands as years of suppressed rage, terror, and grief washed over me. I remembered the cold concrete. I remembered Arthur's voice abandoning me. I remembered Isabella's smirk in the courtroom. God had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it playing the desperate, love-starved biological daughter. A soft knock interrupted my revelation. The door opened, and Isabella walked in. Seeing her face in the flesh, unaged and smugly radiant, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my veins. She was holding a garish neon pink dress covered in cheap-looking sequins. "Morning, Chloe," she chimed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Mum told me you didn't have anything suitable for the gala tonight. I picked this out for you from my old closet. I think the bright color will really distract from your posture." In my past life, I had taken the dress humiliated, but eager to please, and ended up looking like a clown next to Isabella's elegant black velvet gown. I stood up slowly, wiping the remaining tears from my eyes. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. No jealousy, no inferiority, just pity for the fool she was about to become. "Keep it," I said, my voice shockingly steady and cold. "I won't be attending the gala tonight." Isabella blinked, clearly taken aback by my tone. What, but Mum and Dad said everyone has to be there. Alistair Montgomery is coming, Chloe. He's a billionaire. We have to make a good impression. Then you make it, I replied, turning my back on her and pulling a large leather duffel bag from the top of my closet. What are you doing? Isabella demanded, her sweet facade slipping to reveal the sharp, anxious girl beneath. I'm packing. I didn't bother folding anything. I grabbed only the things I had bought with my own money from my part-time graphic design gigs, my laptop, my camera, a few pairs of jeans, and some plain sweaters. I left every designer purse, every diamond necklace, and every piece of silk clothing they had bought to turn me into their perfect little doll. You can't just leave, Isabella scoffed, crossing her arms. Dad will kill you. He needs tonight to go perfectly. Then he should be thrilled I'm removing myself from the equation, I countered, zipping the heavy bag shut. I swung it over my shoulder and walked right past her, intentionally knocking my shoulder against hers. She stumbled back, letting out an indignant gasp. I marched down the grand staircase, my heart pounding, a steady, relentless drumbeat. I found Arthur, Margaret, and Tristan in the formal dining room having breakfast. They looked up as I entered, their expressions morphing from mild annoyance to outright anger as they saw the duffel bag. Chloe, what is the meaning of this? Arthur demanded, setting his coffee cup down with a sharp clink. Why aren't you getting ready? The stylists will be here in 2 hours. I'm leaving, I stated plainly, dropping the bag onto the marble floor. The thud echoed loudly in the cavernous room. Margaret pressed a hand to her pearls. Leaving, don't be dramatic, darling. Where on earth would you go? You have nothing. I have exactly what I had before you pulled me out of Boston, I said. And I'd rather go back to scrubbing tables than spend another second in this house. Tristan stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. You ungrateful little brat. Dad brings you into our home, gives you everything, and you throw a tantrum on the most important night of the year. Tristan, sit down, Arthur commanded, though his eyes never left mine. They were calculating, assessing this sudden shift in my behavior. Chloe, stop this nonsense. We are meeting Alistair Montgomery tonight. The future of Harrington Enterprises depends on a partnership with him. You will put on a dress and you will smile. No, I said, leaning forward slightly. I know exactly why you want me there tonight, Arthur. You need a sacrificial lamb. You know Isabella has been digging into Montgomery Holdings. You know about the hidden debts, the offshore accounts, the rumors of what he did to his last fiancée. The color drained from Arthur's face. Margaret gasped, and Tristan looked confused. Isabella, who had been lingering in the doorway, eavesdropping, froze. How? Arthur started, his voice barely a whisper. It doesn't matter how I know, I interrupted. What matters is that I am not marrying him. I will not be your collateral damage. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a document I had drafted on my laptop moments before coming down. I slapped it onto the mahogany dining table. This is a legal severance of ties. It renounces any and all claims I have to the Harrington family fortune, inheritance, and name. Sign it and you'll never see me again. Your secret about Alistair stays safe with me, and you don't have to deal with your embarrassing biological daughter anymore. Arthur stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Dad, don't listen to her, Isabella said, rushing into the room. Her eyes were wide, calculating. If she leaves, who is going to marry Alistair? He's expecting a Harrington bride. I turned to Isabella, offering her a chilling, knowing smile. Well, Isabella, you're a Harrington, aren't you? At least on paper. And he's a billionaire. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Wealth, status. The crown jewel of New York. Isabella swallowed hard. In my past life, she knew exactly how dangerous Alistair was. But right now, in this timeline, Her private investigator hadn't finished the report yet. She had only heard whispers. The greed in her eyes battled with her caution. I wouldn't mind meeting him," Isabella said softly, looking at Arthur. "I can do it, Dad. I can secure the partnership. We don't need her." Arthur looked from Isabella to me, his business mind rapidly calculating the odds. Isabella was polished. She knew how to play the game. She would likely secure the deal faster than I ever could. Without another word, Arthur pulled a Mont Blanc pen from his breast pocket. He signed the severance document with a sharp, aggressive scrawl. "You are dead to us," Arthur said, sliding the paper back across the table. "The feeling is completely mutual," I whispered. I picked up the document, grabbed my bag, and walked out the front doors of the estate. Just as I reached the end of the long driveway, a sleek black Bentley passed me, heading toward the house. Through the tinted window, I caught a glimpse of Alistair Montgomery's sharp jawline. A cold smile touched my lips. "Have fun, Isabella. The billionaire is all yours." Freedom tasted like cheap deli coffee and the metallic bite of the New York subway. With my severance document folded in my jacket and the few $1,000s I had saved, I rented a cramped, radiator-clanking studio apartment in Astoria, Queens. It was a far cry from the sprawling Connecticut estate, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Surviving wasn't enough. I needed insurance. In my past life, Alistair Montgomery and his team of ruthless corporate lawyers had framed me by burying my name in a labyrinth of shell companies. I spent 20 years in a concrete box thinking about those companies. I knew their names. I knew their routing numbers. I knew exactly how Alistair funneled dirty money from his illegal offshore accounts into his pristine Manhattan real estate ventures. I just needed the right weapon to expose him without getting caught in the crossfire. I applied for a junior data analyst position at Carmichael and Company, a prestigious financial forensics firm known for auditing high-net-worth individuals and assisting federal investigators. Gideon Carmichael, the firm's founder, was a notoriously sharp-eyed ex-prosecutor who despised dirty money. During my interview, I bypassed the standard portfolio and instead handed him a mapped-out algorithm I had coded. It showed a theoretical model of how a logistics empire could manipulate shipping manifests to launder capital through real estate. Gideon looked at the code, then looked at me, his piercing blue eyes narrowing. "This isn't theoretical, is it, Chloe?" "It's a blueprint," I replied smoothly. "Hire me, give me access to a Bloomberg terminal, and I'll show you the foundation of the biggest financial fraud of the decade." He hired me on the spot. For the next 6 months, I lived and breathed data. I used Carmichael's encrypted servers to slowly, meticulously trace the breadcrumbs Alistair had left behind. I found Oceanic Ventures in the Cayman's Pinnacle Holdings in Delaware and the exact wire transfers that connected them to Montgomery Holdings. But I didn't stop there. I needed to ensure my former family couldn't wriggle their way out. I kept a close eye on the society pages. The media was obsessed with the whirlwind romance of Alistair Montgomery and Isabella Harrington. They were dubbed the Royals of Wall Street. But knowing Alistair, I knew the cracks were already forming beneath the flawless veneer. Isabella's private investigator had finally delivered his report, but it was too late. Blinded by the billion-dollar price tag and the intoxicating media attention, Isabella ignored the red flags. She convinced Arthur to merge the Harrington logistics network with Alistair's supply chain, supposedly to cut costs before Montgomery Holdings went public. In reality, Arthur was unwittingly offering his entire family legacy as a massive industrial-sized washing machine for Alistair's illicit funds. Then came the gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I was there not as a guest, but monitoring the event's charity auction back-end for a Carmichael client. From the mezzanine shadow, I watched Isabella walk the red carpet. She wore a stunning Oscar de la Renta gown, diamonds glittering at her throat. But as a photographer's flash illuminated her face, I saw it. The subtle, unnatural thickness of heavy, high-coverage concealer on her left cheekbone. Her smile was brittle, her eyes darting nervously toward Alistair, whose grip on her waist was visibly bruisingly tight. The Montgomery curse had begun. The monster had shown his face. A week later, my burner phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. I answered using a voice-altering application I had installed. "Who is this?" a panicked, breathless voice whispered. It was Isabella. "I know someone is looking into the Cayman accounts. You pinged the secure server. How much do you want to keep quiet?" She was terrified, not of the law, but of Alistair, finding out that someone was onto him, knowing he would blame her. "I don't want your money. Isabella," I said, my modulated voice echoing in the small Queen's apartment. "I just want you to reap exactly what you've sown." I hung up, popped the SIM card out and snapped it in half. The trap was fully set. That night, I compiled a massive encrypted dossier containing every wire transfer, every forged manifest, and every piece of dirty communication between Montgomery Holdings and Harrington Enterprises. I didn't send it to the press. I sent it directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network FinCEN and the regional director of the SEC. Champagne flutes clinked against a backdrop of string quartets and suffocating arrogance inside the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria. Tonight was the Montgomery Holdings IPO launch, designed to be the absolute coronation of New York's new financial king. I was there completely uninvited by my former family, seated securely at a secluded VIP table alongside Gideon Carmichael. Dressed in an understated tailored charcoal suit, bought with my first legitimate bonus, I blended perfectly into the shadows of the mezzanine. Below me, the elite of Wall Street mingled blissfully, unaware that they were standing on a live landmine. Arthur Harrington was holding court near the ice sculpture, bragging loudly to a group of skeptical hedge fund managers about the recent merger of the Harrington Logistics Network with Montgomery's supply chain. He genuinely believed he had secured his dynasty. A few feet away, Margaret was practically vibrating with validation, adjusting her diamond necklace for the society photographers. But Isabella was the one I couldn't take my eyes off of. She wore a breathtaking crimson Oscar de la Renta gown, but she looked entirely like a ghost. Before the main speeches began, I watched her slip out the side doors toward the restrooms. I gave Gideon a silent nod, left my table and followed her. I pushed open the heavy oak door of the ladies' lounge. Isabella was standing at the marble sink, her hands gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles were white. She was frantically applying another thick layer of high-coverage concealer to her left cheekbone. "The trick to covering a bruise," I said, my voice echoing off the expensive tile, "is a green color corrector before the foundation." Isabella whipped around, dropping her compact. It shattered on the floor. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. "Chloe." She gasped, her hand instinctively flying to her cheek. "What are you doing here? You aren't on the guest list. If Alistair sees you..." "Alistair has much bigger problems tonight than an uninvited guest," I replied smoothly, stepping further into the luxurious room. I looked her up and down, feeling not a single ounce of the inferiority that used to choke me. "You look exhausted, Isabella." The billionaire lifestyle taking its toll. Her shock quickly morphed into venomous defense. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I'm about to be the wealthiest woman in Manhattan. Dad cut you off completely. You're nothing. I warned you both about the curse," I said softly, stepping closer until I could see the frantic, pulsing vein in her neck. "You hired the private investigators. You saw the offshore accounts, but your greed was louder than your survival instinct. Now you've tied Arthur's entire company to a sinking criminal ship." Isabella swallowed hard, her facade cracking. "How do you know about that?" I didn't answer. I simply offered her a cold, empty smile, turned on my heel, and walked out, leaving her trembling in the quiet bathroom. I made it back to my seat, just as Alastair Montgomery took the stage. The crowd fell silent, mesmerized by his dangerous magnetic charisma. He launched into a grandiose speech about the future of global commerce, thanking his visionary future father-in-law and his beautiful devoted fiancée. Isabella had returned to the room, standing rigidly by the stage, looking like she was facing a firing squad rather than a crowd of admirers. Gideon checked his gold watch. 60 seconds, he murmured, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. Right on time, I whispered. Alastair raised his glass for a final toast. To the future. Before anyone could drink, the heavy brass doors of the Waldorf ballroom violently burst open. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The sudden silence was instantly shattered by the terrifying, chaotic sound of heavy boots swarming the marble floors. Dozens of federal agents wearing tactical jackets emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the SEC flooded the room. The crowd erupted into panicked shrieks, billionaires dropping their crystal glasses and shoving each other to clear a path. "Alastair Montgomery." A lead agent barked through a megaphone, the sound piercing the chaos. "By the order of the Southern District of New York, you are under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and federal racketeering. Step away from the podium." Alastair's arrogant smirk completely vanished. It was replaced by a snarl of pure, feral desperation, but he didn't look at the armed agents. He whipped his head around and glared directly at Isabella. "She did it!" Alastair roared, pointing a shaking finger at his fiancée as agents rushed the stage. "I had nothing to do with the Cayman transfers. Harrington Enterprises merged their dirty accounts into my company without my knowledge. She set me up." "No, Alastair, please!" Isabella shrieked, backing away in sheer terror as an agent grabbed her arms. "I didn't do anything. Arthur Harrington." Another agent shouted, weaving through the panicked crowd toward the front row. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aiding in the concealment of illicit assets." "Do you have any idea who I am?" Arthur bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple as two agents aggressively pinned him against a cocktail table, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Margaret screamed hysterically, collapsing onto the floor as the Harrington empire dissolved in front of her eyes. On the stage, Isabella was violently shoved against the podium to be cuffed. Through the absolute pandemonium, her frantic, tear-filled eyes scanned the upper level of the ballroom. Her gaze locked onto mine. I was standing at the edge of the mezzanine balcony, my hands resting casually on the railing, looking down at the wreckage. The realization hit Isabella with the force of a freight train. Her jaw dropped, the blood completely draining from her face as she looked from me to Gideon Carmichael. She finally understood. The stupid, uncultured biological daughter they had thrown to the wolves was the architect who had meticulously engineered their absolute destruction. She opened her mouth to scream my name, but an agent shoved her forward, reading her Miranda rights as she was dragged away. I watched as my former family, the people who had gladly sentenced me to death in a past life, were paraded out of the ballroom, in chains, their legacy turning to ash. I walked out into the crisp, cool Manhattan night. I didn't have a massive estate or a billionaire husband, but I had my freedom. The billionaire's curse hadn't missed me. I was the curse, and I had just delivered the final punchline. Did Chloe's brilliant revenge completely satisfy your craving for justice, Or do you genuinely think Isabella and Arthur got exactly what they deserved? The billionaire's curse finally claimed its true victims, and Chloe built her own empire from the ashes. If this jaw-dropping story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who loves a savage comeback, and hit subscribe with the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling story. What would your revenge plan be? Let me know in the comments below.